Meet Savorista. They have premium craft decaf and half-calf coffee with bold, rich flavor. Made from high-altitude, hand-picked Arabica beans and naturally decaffeinated with water or sugarcane processes, and there's no harsh chemicals.
But if you think chocolate, caramel, citrus, even bourbon pecan and mint and mocha, it's small batch roasted, literally so good, customers call it the best decaf they've ever tried.
Better sleep, less anxiety, all the flavor. Use our code INFOGO to get 25% off at checkout at savorista.com. You can also find that link in the show notes. Hey, William, do you love craft beer?
Yes, I do. We
If you're
can,
looking for the perfect gift for a beer lover or just want to show off your brewery pride, the Harpoon Shop has something you won't find anywhere else.
and here's something special just for our listeners. You can save 25% off just by using our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm Kat,
And that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity with every show.
Absolutely. We're going to go back in time just a little bit into the end of the 19th century. And we're going to go back to the Black Tobacco Wars. What do you think?
Okay,
Hey, it's part of history. History is history, right?
that's true. The good, the bad, the ugly.
This is going to be the bad and the ugly, I'm sure.
Mm. All right, let's settle in.
Okay. So at the end of the 19th century, in the tobacco fields of Virginia and North Carolina, a quiet war was brewing, not with cannons or battle lines, but with contracts, prices, and, well, livelihoods of everyday people. And this was called the Black Tobacco Wars. And it was a series of clashes between Black American farmers and the powerful tobacco monopolies that controlled nearly every step of the market. For thousands of Black growers, tobacco wasn't a crop. It really was their best chance at independence in a post-Reconstruction South stacked against them.
But, of course, that promise came with a trap. Giant tobacco trusts dictated prices, manipulated grading systems, and left farmers, especially black farmers, trapped in cycles of debt they could never escape. What began as frustration over unfair pay turned into organized resistance, boycotts, and at times, open confrontation. These conflicts expose deep fault lines in American society. Who controls the economy? Who benefits from free markets? And how race shaped access to power?
Yeah, so the Black Tobacco Wars, they really weren't just about tobacco. They were about exploitation dressed up as, well, business, racial inequality that was backed into economy, and the courage of people who refused to quietly accept a system that was, well, rigged or stacked against them. And this is the story of farmers who pushed back and a monopoly that fought to keep them in their place. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty tough one that we're going to do here.
Well, we're going to jump to the post Civil War South. Emancipation did not come with land ownership or economic security. Many formerly enslaved people entered the sharecropping system, working land owned by white landlords. Others became tenant farmers, renting land but lacking control over prices, tools, or credit. And landowners controlled stores, supplies, and accounting, keeping black farmers dependent.
And we need to be clear, slavery had ended, but this was another way to keep people.
Oppression alive.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to figure out how to do that. And I think we need to get into Reconstruction somewhere down the line because that's a uh, topic in history for sure. But, there was a cycle of debt, seeds, fertilizer, tools, food, these were all bought on credit. 90% of the time, it was inflated prices. You had end of season accounting, which was opaque and often, just to be quite honest with you, it was dishonest. So debt carried over year to year. It was effectively trapping families in economic servitude. So, in other words, this, you would have the seeds that you would have to buy, right, to plant your crop. Then you would have the fertilizer. Then you would have the tools. And these would all be bought for inflated prices for Black Americans. And at the end of the season, the prices that they would give for their crops wouldn't match what they had in it, basically, is what we're talking about here.
Tobacco was one of the most valuable and labor-intensive crops in Virginia and North Carolina. Quality grading determined price, making farmers vulnerable to manipulation. And for black farmers, tobacco represented a rare chance at higher income than cotton.
You had the rise of monopolies. The American Tobacco Company, led by James B. Duke, well, he consolidated control in the 1890s. That's going to be a future episode for sure. His company dominated processing, but also it dominated marketing and distribution. He had very little competition. So, and the monopoly, it dictated prices to the farmers. So it was easier to suppress farmers because, especially black farmers, right? Because they didn't really have nowhere else to go but to this American Tobacco Company.
Tobacco prices dropped so low that even successful harvests couldn't cover debts. Farmers worked longer hours and planted more acreage with diminishing returns, and survival became nearly impossible under monopoly controlled pricing.
So think about this for just a minute. They're planting more acres, right? And they're accumulating even more debt, but the crops that they're producing is not even enough to cover the debts that they had to begin with, much less the debts that they had acquiring the new land or renting that land or whatever. Just to be clear,
Right.
farmers, well, they started to form alliances, cooperatives, and well, it was really an early union to push back. White leg groups often excluded black farmers, well, forcing black farmers to organize separately. Thus, the Colored Farmers Alliance, it emerged. And this was a local black-led cooperative. And these groups really emphasized collective bargaining, fair prices, and economic independence.
Racial exclusion, crushing debt, and monopoly power created a volatile environment. What began as economic frustration set the stage for organized resistance, and these pressures would soon erupt into the Black Tobacco Wars.
From the perspective of the American Tobacco Company, there was no war at all. Executives didn't see desperate farmers, they saw supply. Okay, I can understand that. Tobacco was a commodity, and commodities were, well, they were governed by the markets, not by morality. And prices, they argued, reflected efficiency. So if tobacco was sold cheaply, it wasn't exploitation, it was competition at work. Company leaders, they spoke the language of order and stability, consolidation. They claimed reduced chaos. Fewer buyers meant fewer predictable prices. Standardized grading meant consistent quality. And to the monopoly, this wasn't greed, it was modernization. Now I can kind of understand this. Even in today's market, you're going to have quality control, right? So let's just say that you're producing apples. I'm producing apples. Your apples are way better than mine, so they're going to grade out grade A apples. You're going to get top dollar for them, right? My apples do not because they have blemishes or whatever. They might grade out a little bit differently. I might get B pricing for them. I can kind of understand where the tobacco company is coming from in this standpoint.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Okay.
And James B. Duke and his allies framed the American Tobacco Company as an engine of progress. They argued that small farmers were resisting the inevitable march of industrial capitalism. In their view, efficiency, not justice, was the real problem. But there was another fear beneath the rhetoric. So, black farmers organizing was challenging more than the prices. It challenged the hierarchy. Collective action by Black Americans in the rural South threatened the social order as much as the economic one. Organizing suggested independence, and independence suggested power. Until
Y-
To the elites, that was dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. They're challenging more than just this grading system. They're challenging the prices themselves because, again, we got to go back to that cycle of debt. Their input is greater than their output for black farmers during this time.
Right.
So, so farmers' alliances weren't seen as negotiation, right? They were seen as insubordination, boycotts, if you will. Um, they were disruption. This is how corporate tobacco companies saw them, and this was framed as rebellion. This framing it really mattered in this sense because once resistance was labeled disorder, suppression, well, that became justified. Violence could be explained as restoring stability, and arrests could be framed as law enforcement. Lynchings, well, they could hide behind the language of keeping the peace. So, to the monopoly, this wasn't oppression, it was business. And business, they believed, required control. Now, this is where I have a problem because even in, like mining institutions, and we'll get into some of those later on, corporations get behind this. Hey, we got to keep the order. And then to keep the order, we can do all these other things and call it in the name of the law.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, the corruption, the biases.
Yeah, absolutely.
As prices collapsed, black tobacco farmers realized individual survival was impossible. Collective action became the only path forward, and so black farmers formed alliances and local unions to strengthen their bargaining power, and these groups aimed to negotiate fairer tobacco prices and challenge monopoly control. Organizing offered not just economic strategy, but a sense of dignity and mutual protection. Many of these efforts connected to broader movements like the Colored Farmers Alliance.
Let's get into some of those tactics that they used, right? So, boycotts. Farmers withheld their tobacco from market rather than accept lower prices. So they would hold out and wait for the prices to go up. And then crops, they would be stored or sometimes left unsold, despite the financial risk.
Then they refused to sell. Growers rejected monopoly set prices even when debt made selling tempting. This directly challenged the American Tobacco Company's control.
They had secret organizing. Meetings were often held at night, sometimes in churches, sometimes in homes, or even in remote locations such as their fields or somewhere where other people wouldn't know where they were at or where they were meeting. And secrecy, well, this was necessary to avoid, retaliation or exposure. Again, remember lynchings and arrest and things like that, and the word of these corporations of protecting the law and keeping order. Eventually, word spread quietly through trusted community networks.
Of course, there are challenges and retaliation. Intimidation by white landowners, where farmers faced threats of eviction, violence, or loss of access to land. Landowners often sided with tobacco buyers and monopolies.
Black American tobacco farmers, they had lack of legal protections. Courts and local law enforcement, well, they rarely defended Black farmers' rights. Contracts and debts were enforced selectively and unfairly because, well, systemic racism, it was alive and well in this time.
Oof, was it ever? The systemic racism and racial discrimination limited access to credit, markets, and political influence. Black organizers were portrayed as dangerous or subversive, and these obstacles made organizing risky and resistance an act of courage.
So think about this. The white tobacco farmers, they can organize peacefully, right? Black tobacco farmers, they're working outside of the law, so to speak. They can be held to a different standard. Tensions, they were rising. Each act of refusal increased pressure on monopolies and landowners. So the standoff between farmers and corporate power, well, it intensified and this started to set the stage for confrontation. It would also escalate into violence.
As negotiations failed, tensions reached a breaking point. Economic desperation hardened into open defiance, and what began as organized resistance shifted toward direct confrontation.
You still had that continued price manipulation made peaceful protests feel, well, futile, right? Because debt, hunger, and the threat of eviction, well, it pushed black farmers toward riskier actions. Communities faced a choice: submit or resist. Could you imagine having to make a choice between whether you want to eat, continue your debt, or you want to work toward the cause of fair business practices?
It's really hard to survive, and it's really hard to imagine even back then when it was a harder society to live in because food was not readily available like it is today.
No, and you didn't have a lot of the different programs that were available. And anything that these black farmers were doing, they were outside of, well, the law, especially in the South, where, the law was really just one-sided during this particular time.
That's putting it lightly, but yes.
I think before we get into any the attacks on warehouses and stores, I think we should take a small break and reflect.
It sounds good.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, listen up, all of my workforce friends out there, whether you're ranchers, farmers, or you just need a pair of good leather gloves, look no further than Bare Knuckles, the best leather gloves ever made, featuring a patent design crafted for natural curve of the fingers. These gloves deliver a perfect fit, superior protection, and all-day comfort. Made from premium leather, right now get an exclusive 15% off, and you can find that at buybareknuckles.com. But make sure you use our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Upgrade your hands, and remember, every purchase, well, it supports the show. So thank you.
If you love unforgettable treats, you've got to try Molly B's gourmet cookies. These aren't your average cookies. Molly B's brings bold, artisan crafted cookies straight to your pantry. We're talking chocolate, cherry, and amaretto and be cordial. Earl Grey, lavender, white chocolate, and lemon glaze in the tea. Even maple, bacon, whiskey, and white chocolate in the Boss Man. Founded by a single mom from Alaska, Molly Bees has become a national sensation. You get 10% off any product using our code INFOGO at mollybees.com. Find the link in the show notes. So, tobacco warehouses and company controlled stores became targets. Crops held by monopolies were destroyed or reclaimed, and these attacks were symbolic strikes against the system that trapped farmers.
They would attack those warehouses and company controlled stores mainly because that's where the tobacco that they were producing was being sold, for profit, right?
Mm.
So they really wanted to attack those because that would really hurt the big tobacco company of the time. In parts of Virginia and North Carolina, confrontations turned violent. You had armed farmers that attempted to defend meetings, crops, and leaders. Could you imagine? I could not imagine having to be armed to defend your crop, from burning or whatever they're gonna do to your livelihood here.
The
Whether
entire sabotage of you just trying to live as a free person but can't.
Yeah, but what if you're not even part of these meetings or whatever's going on during this time, but yet you're singled out because maybe your crop is better, you're producing more, maybe they're just trying to inch you out to take your land. Like it's just so many different things behind it. Like they're going after your livelihood here.
Right.
And firearms were often used as deterrents rather than tools of mass violence. In other words, just to show a force.
Crazy, crazy business. So, armed groups moved to suppress organizing efforts. Night raids, beatings, and forced evictions became very common.
along with lynchings and whatever else they found.
Decided to do, yeah.
Yeah. Then you had state and legal repression, right? Because arrests targeted organizers more than perpetrators of violence. So law enforcement, well, they often sided with landowners and buyers, or they often sided with corporate tobacco companies because at the end of the day, corporate tobacco companies want one thing, the tobacco, right?
Hmm.
A profit. What better way to do it than, hey, we pay you a little money on the side, and maybe you go and do this, or maybe the corporate companies pay the landowners, whatever the case may be. There's going to be a little bit of money exchanged here, but at the same time, black tobacco farmers are targeted.
It's so awful going back through this time in our history. But then I'm seeing the correlations between history and today's society is also very striking and very sad.
I mean, we could go back and do one on the rise of Hitler and how he used racism. We can talk about third world countries that use racism and actually take out whole groups of people just for their beliefs.
Right. In probably in some cases more than most, violence did escalate to lynchings, and these acts were intended to terrorize communities into submission.
And the impact on Black rural communities, families were, well, they were displaced from land they had farmed for years. Crops, well, they were seized or destroyed, wiping out an entire season of labor. And fear, well, it spread rapidly through rural Black communities. Churches, meeting spaces became places of both refuge and risk. And you put your life into this crop, and this is your paycheck, and it is being seized at the time of harvest, or it's being destroyed. You just have no way to repay the debt when that banker comes calling. Like, there's so much injustice in this period of time for Black tobacco farmers, all in the name of corporate tobacco.
So the violence and resistance forced the issue into public view. For the first time, the tobacco monopoly faced sustained, organized pressure from below.
Yeah, because now it become political and economic. Because in some areas, well, farmers, well, they secured small price commissions or temporary improvements in grading. You know, these were just so let's get into those limited victories. Uh, and these were not all over the place because politics and economics, well, it played a major part in these small victories. Some farmers secured small price commissions or temporary improvements in grading. These gains were uneven and often short-lived because the American Tobacco Company and related trusts, well, they remained in power. There's no other way to put it. They had the money, they had the backing, and they had control of processing, and they had control of credit and markets. Just really did not fundamentally change overnight because they could still be unfair to black farmers and grade their tobacco lower regardless of whatever grade it actually came out as. They still had control, but they did give up to some victories. How about that? Does that make sense?
Meeting one quarter of the way to human decency is a step, I guess.
But even at that, I don't think they were doing it for human decency. I think they were doing it out of, hey, we got some backlash from, policymakers. So let's step back and let's continue to hide behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain. Just look over here at what we're doing. I think it's more of deflecting than actually being decent, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I can see that too. The Black Tobacco Wars exposed how farmers were exploited by monopolies. Newspapers, politicians, and reformers began discussing unfair pricing and trust power. The conflicts helped legitimize the idea that farmers' struggles were systemic and not individual failures.
Yeah, so influence on later labor movements. Well, these efforts, they really laid the groundwork for future agricultural unions and cooperatives. Because you have strategies like collective bargaining, withholding goods, and organized resistance. Well, these would reappear in later labor struggles. The Black Tobacco Wars, well, they became an early example of rural labor activism in the United States. And for all of those Black farmers who had to struggle, we say thank you as a labor force today.
Yes, because without that initial step into that, we wouldn't be at least to halfway decent today.
No, I would agree. And, their struggle really laid the groundwork for labor activism later on. And sometimes you have to go there to get here, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think some things could just
Work out on their own and be fair and have human decency. Unfor
yeah, I would like that to be the case. Unfortunately, that is still not the case today. So it's just sad, really. I just feel like us as humans should have been able to evolve past this petty what's mine is mine, I guess. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does.
When we're all stuck on this floating space rock together forever.
Yeah, until the aliens show up and vaporize us all.
Oh yeah, because I don't think they're going to keep us around if they manage to make it here.
Three-Eye Atlas is not aliens.
It's not aliens.
No, you said it was aliens. I told you it wasn't. It wasn't.
Well, dang. Dang.
Remember when we did that episode and I was like, it's not aliens, and you're like, it's aliens?
Yes,
Okay. Well, it's Coke.
it's Pepsi for
Anyway,
sure. Like I literally have my I don't know if you can hear my eyes jiggling.
I had before we got started, which is probably what's really messing with my voice now that I think about it. Before we got started, I had some Earl Grey black tea.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I kind of had it hot. And I was really kind of leaning on my green tea, because I like it cold with coconut milk. Probably would have
Hmm.
been better.
Hmm.
Then I really could have jingled my ice too, just saying.
Yeah, that's true.
But now I can't because you can't hear the tea bag.
No, I can't hear it just dunking up and down. It doesn't work that way.
No.
So, black farmers face greater risks than their white counterparts. That should be a given, but hey. Organizing was treated as criminal when led by black Americans, and violence.
So I was just gonna say, yeah, because they treated this as, it was more about suppression than it was about anything else, right? And when black farmers would organize, again, they would use the letter of the law to hide behind the law for injustice, for lynchings and false arrest and, you know, seizing crops or land or whatever.
Right. The conflict really revealed how race shaped who was allowed to protest and who was punished for it.
Yeah, absolutely. White tobacco farmers and populist movements also resisted monopolies, but they were not under the same scrutiny as the black tobacco farmers. So while white farmers had greater access to legal protection and political representation, well, minority groups like black farmers and sharecroppers and immigrant laborers, well, they face similar economic pressures with fewer protections. So the Black Tobacco Wars fit into a broader pattern of marginalized groups that were fighting for equal systems in a system that treated them unequally.
As less than. The conflicts did not dismantle monopoly power, but they changed the conversation. They demonstrated that even the most excluded communities could organize and resist, and their legacy would echo in later labor, civil rights, and economic justice movements.
So many black farmers who resisted, well, they lost access to their land through evictions or forced sales. Generational wealth and security, well, it eroded. Just to put this into perspective here, families who farmed their land for decades, they had to leave the land they knew best, or only to watch it be absorbed by landlords or to the tobacco monopoly. Even today, small farmers face this because they really cannot compete in a global market that we have. But we're talking about something totally different. But to watch something that has been in your family for generations to just be dissolved is disheartening. To see these black tobacco farmers lose their land just because of racial inequality.
Some families joined the Great Migration, leaving the South for industrial cities. I mean, at this point, I'm willing to bet a lot of them didn't really have a choice. Their farms were probably razed. They probably weren't able to go back to a survivable community to even try to make a living. So
No,
they
and
had to,
go
sorry,
ahead.
so they had to seek opportunity and safety
And
and
not
move
only
hundreds of
that,
miles north.
yeah, not only that, you had these tobacco companies that had them indebted. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, there's no way these black tobacco farmers could really get out of this.
Right.
So, newspapers and history books, well, they rarely record black farmers' efforts. It just doesn't fit the standard. Their struggles were downplayed, even silenced, or framed as, well, criminal. So, the story of the Black Tobacco Wars, well, it faded from public memory. Yet it lived on in the fields, churches, and families, and the stories of those who survived it and who lost their livelihood and who were able to hang on to it. And we should not let that part of history be forgotten.
Never. And I wish for this episode, I wish we could have found some names, but we really couldn't find any names to honor the farmers that fought for their survival in this time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, but if anybody has any stories or any history buff knowledge about this subject and has any names we can throw in here to honor them, that would be awesome.
And you can email it to us or you can put it on the Facebook page.
Absolutely. Despite the violence, debt, and repression, communities continued to organize, and survival itself became an act of defiance. And I love that.
So do I. Economic exploitation, well, it's really inseparable from racial oppression because black farmers were punished, not just for resisting monopolies, but for challenging the racial norms of the time. That's what they were really punished for because, again, white farmers were going under the same thing, but black farmers' crops would be downgraded, or they faced higher debt to income ratios. Uh, and sometimes their land would just be seized, or their sharecropping contracts would be ended abruptly and for no reason whatsoever.
They could have the best crop out there and they'd still be in debt. I mean, the system was stacked against them and they had every right to fight for their survival in that time in history.
Yeah, and I think we go back in time and do an episode on big tobacco, the tobacco monopoly.
Absolutely. Communities historically excluded from wealth still fight for economic autonomy, and access to fair markets, credit, and representation remains uneven.
Just kind of to put this in perspective here, the Black Tobacco Wars remind us that progress is rarely peaceful or, well, guaranteed.
Courage in the face of systemic oppression helped shape later labor and civil rights activism.
These Black farmers may not have won outright, but their resistance will expanded the boundaries of what was and is possible.
And their legacy lives in every movement that insists dignity and fairness are worth fighting for.
I had never heard of this. This was a listener request. And I can't remember the listener. I can't remember where I got it from, but I am 100% sure this was a listener request because this one has been on the back burner there for a hot minute.
I don't remember who, but I think it is too.
I wish I could remember. who requested it because I know I knew nothing about this.
I didn't know anything about this either, but it didn't strike me as shocking, especially during that time period.
Same, same. You know, I can see it not just being tobacco
But
for black
being
farmers.
everything, yeah, everything under the sun.
Yeah, especially in the southern part of the United States, I can see oppression, during the time period that we're talking about here. I can see, land being seized, crops being downgraded, debt to income ratio being exploited. I can see all of that, especially in the southern states through Reconstruction.
I wish there was more compassionate people willing to stand up and fight for equality during that time period too.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much all I've got, Kat.
Me too. If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to help us keep the show going, you can do so at Patreon. You can find that link in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuned in, thank you.
Join the Facebook group and Info on the Go,
Over there, you can share with us your show ideas.
or ask us a question.
But whatever you're doing, stop right now and make sure you hit that follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Send us a text using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Hey, leaving that review really does help others find us. But you can also email us at,
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com.
and you can find that email address in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.
Every morning starts with a choice. Don't settle for just coffee. Rise up with strong coffee. Meet the world's strongest cup of joe. Strong isn't just a drink, it's a movement. And strong stands for striving to reach our natural greatness.
Born from one simple need to be better. They rebuilt coffee from the ground up, infusing organic coffee with collagen, protein, nootropics, and functional ingredients that fuel your body and sharpen your mind. There's no crash, no compromises, just clean energy, focus, and flavor that fires you up.
Whether you're chasing kids, chasing goals, or chasing greatness, don't just wake up, rise up. Strong coffee, the world's strongest cup of joe, for a world ready to be better.
Use code INFOGO at checkout to save 15%.